Okay, yeah, we'll make a start. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. My name is Kevin Lindor. I'm the Athlete and Coach Services Coordinator for Pacific Sport, Vancouver Island. If you do hear a little bit of background, it's my daughter. I'm just keeping an eye on her while she eats dinner. You know, crazy times and all that, and trying to juggle with technology. But it's all fun. I'm really pleased to start our nutrition series tonight with a new friend of Pacific Sport, Alison Quinlan. And Alison has got some great experience for being a varsity athlete, taking it onto the semi-professional stage, as well as intertwining the mental performance with the nutrition side of things. So really excited for this series as we try and target the athlete, the coach, and the parent, and we'll be honing in on the parent tonight as well, who, as I was saying with Jennifer, who's on the call as well, is they pay the bills, generally speaking. So it's integral that they're educated and informed about what's out there, avoiding some of the pitfalls, and knowing how to power those mini athletes we have. So a few housekeeping things. I think most of you will be on mute now. If you can mute yourselves while Alison does the presentation, that would be great, just so we don't get any feedback. I'll certainly be muting mine unless I'm needed. And if you have any questions, we really want to hear from you. You know, these things are really better when we have engagement. So just throw them into the chat box, and Alison and I will try and get through as many as we can. And we'll open it out towards the end as well. That's pretty much it from me. I'm going to pass it over to Alison. Alison, hopefully you can do a better intro and bio about yourself and take us into what we're in for tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. That sounds great. I'm just going to keep that chat open there just in case anything comes up. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to chat with everyone tonight about nutrition for helping parents support their child athlete and those active kids. Yeah, so it looks like Kevin went over some of those main Zoom things, but yes, just please feel free to put questions in the chat box. We'll be monitoring those, and then can also I'll leave some time at the end for questions. Probably won't use the whiteboard feature anymore, but yeah, may use the chat throughout just to get some feedback from people, and we'll go from there. So yeah, Kevin already did give a wonderful introduction to me, but I was a competitive athlete, much more so in some of my younger years, but played competitive golf at UVic and then continued on to play on mini tours in the States after that, but played a whole variety of sports growing up. And then just became really interested in different factors impacting sport performance and started really looking at the mental side. And then just became so passionate about the role nutrition played, and thought, wow, this is such a neat area to sort of combine the two. And so went back to school to become a registered dietitian and really combine those two areas, and had a wonderful experience working with the UBC head dietitian, working with all the varsity athletes there, and got to just learn so much from her. So it's a little bit of a background on me. But I would love to just hear just some of the things that you guys might be really interested in learning about, and I'll try and touch on them where I can. But yeah, if there's just anything in particular, so if you like, you can put them in the chat, and I'll just sort of take a look here. But yeah, feel free to enter a few things that you're really interested in learning about tonight. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to maybe put some in the chat there. And the chat box should be at the bottom of the screen, I believe. And if anyone can't find the chat, you can also feel free to unmute yourself and to just speak out loud about anything that you might be interested in learning about tonight. To get them to eat vegetables, yes. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Recovery nutrition. Okay, awesome. Post-training, post-competition recovery. Yes, so we'll definitely be talking about that. Yeah, save some money saving tips. Yes, balancing nutrition with cost. I know, especially these days. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, we'll definitely be touching on all of these things tonight. Yeah, and if anything it does come up again, feel free to put it in the chat there and I will take a look. So just a little overview of what we will talk about. So I will just talk generally about the importance of nutrition and sort of the key fundamentals. I won't go into too much detail with these, but just having an understanding of why all three macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fats are important. Why is this important for not only athletes, children, just growing and developing. We'll also look at just fueling, how to fuel for different things, some strategies with meal planning, just to touch a little bit on sort of seasonal eating. I know it can be challenging in the winter time, so a few ideas there, and then some grab and go snack ideas because I know we're busy. Yes, nutrition on the go, just see in the chat. Absolutely. So we'll definitely talk about that because there's a lot of driving around to different practices and balancing everything. And then it looks like another one, okay, a few ideas of foods to eat, yeah, before a soccer game. Absolutely. So good, that's great. We'll touch on those. Okay, so why is nutrition important? And so, I mean, generally, we know, helping for our healthy growth and development, especially for kids, and then as they grow, it's just such a rapid period of growth. So, ensuring that there's adequate nutrition, especially when they're active in sports, too, to maintain that healthy growth and development. As they're trying to gain strength, nutrition can really support increasing that muscle and the strength. Another really one is important for repairing damaged tissue, especially when playing multiple sports. And maybe there's, practices and then games, and there's quite a bit in a week. We're damaging, making little micro tears in our tissues. So nutrition can support that recovery and repair. Important for immune function, especially these days, everyone's quite focused on maintaining strong immune systems. And then important for mental focus and thinking, and not just in sports, but helps in school as well. How can we kind of regulate those blood sugars and energy levels so that that mental focus is really there and can help with that. Strength and power, decreasing that risk of injury, and even with sleep. And I'm sure as parents, you've noticed different foods can, impact sleep of kids, whether it's high sugary things or just different things like that. But nutrition can certainly impact and help improve sleep. So first and foremost, I always just sort of like to touch on, at the end of the day, food is it's fueling us. And yes, there's so many wonderful things about it in terms of, connection and conversations over meals. But it's tough in these days. There's just so many mixed messages with nutrition. And so, just remember, food can really help fuel our body and our brain. They bodies need it to move, to do things. Our brains need fuel. And so it is really important that we're getting that adequate nutrition. So like I mentioned with the three macronutrients, I will talk about carbohydrates, protein, and fats. So carbohydrates providing that fuel, 1 gram provides 4 calories. 1 gram of protein is also providing 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat provides 9 calories. So let's get into why these are important. So the carbohydrates, they're that really rich source of energy for our muscles and our brain. And certainly not going to do a presentation on fad diets, but getting that as a question a lot these days, and just recognizing the importance of all the macronutrients for a balanced diet. So carbohydrates, they break down into that glucose and sugar, and then that's that fuel that either gets used or gets stored to be used at a later time in our liver and our muscles. And then during that sustained activity, our body will use that glycogen as that fuel source. And especially if we think of things like sprinting or really kind of fast twitch type sports, we're needing those carbohydrate stores for that fast acting energy. So just some examples, and I'm sure this is just review, but majority of carbohydrates coming from those whole grain sources, starchy vegetables, beans, fruit, so lots of great options. And I put just kind of an example of the serving size, but of course this, depends on a lot of factors, and we'll get into some of those factors when we talk about fueling, but, thinking of kind of like a fist as a serving size and recognizing that some days we'll need, multiple of those. And of course, depending on the size of the person, they're going to have a different size fist, which usually kind of aligns with that serving size. But these are just some examples here of some really great carbohydrate sources. And what these all have in common is they're rich in fiber, and fiber is going to be really important, especially for helping with sort of sustained energy, along with just so many great health benefits. And then we've got, of course, vegetables, which are, of course, still a source of carbohydrates, just not quite as calorie dense as those starchy carbs, but so important for those vitamins and minerals. So thinking of kind of that two fists or like half a plate, of some of those variety of vegetables, always looking at, as much color as we can find and different things like that to fill the plate. And so I know we have the comment about how to, help with kids eating vegetables, as sometimes that can be a challenge. So I will touch on that a little bit in a few slides. But yeah, it can be a challenge. So we'll talk about that. And then protein. So again, protein, so important for making up our muscles, our skin, hair, bones, plays a really important role for the growth and repair of cells, for our immune system and enzymes and hormones. And then of course, particularly important for athletes for helping to repair and build that muscle, and especially after training. So some examples, often with protein, we might, automatically think of sort of animal based, but there's lots of great plant-based options as well. So serving size here, kind of like a palm of your hand. So an example of some chicken or fish or eggs, and then some wonderful plant-based options like beans, nutritional yeast, and chickpeas. A lot of variety there. And certainly if there's any aversions to some of those, adding in like beans into chili or along with meat can really help kind of beef up the meal and provide a bit more bulk, while also providing a great plant-based source of protein there. And then the third macronutrient, just being fat. So fat's a rich source of energy, and it's so crucial for the absorption of fat soluble vitamins and so many other functions. And so I always get a kick out of some of the marketing with I don't know if anyone's seen those, like they're like the juice packs and or juicing and juice cleanses, and a lot of claims about all the wonderful vitamins and minerals. And yes, there are, but a lot of them we can't actually absorb and digest if they're not taken with some fat. So for example, vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin K, all of those are really, they need fat in order to actually be absorbed in our body. So if we're just having that in sort of as is juice, without that fat, you can't absorb it. So I always used to get a kick out of seeing some of those claims. But fats are so important for those low intensity activities, exercises of long duration, and they just play such a critical role in muscles and the immune system, in that synthesis of vitamin D, of so many hormones. So they really play a very, very crucial role. And then some examples. So if we think kind of like a thumb size, and again, give or take a little bit, but a serving of sort of peanut almond butter, quarter cup avocados, a little bit more. These are usually around 10 grams. So these are just some great examples of fats. Seeds, you'll notice hemp seeds was also in the protein, also in the fats, because of course lots of foods are made up of multiple macronutrients, but hemp seeds a wonderful source of omega-3s. So these are just some examples of fats here and some kind of serving sizes. So if we think about putting that all together, and this is just an example of sort of balancing that plate model. So having, half with some fruits and vegetables, kind of the thumb of some fats on there, palm of protein, and like a fist of carbohydrate, as you can see with that sort of sweet potato there. But of course, recognizing that, different ages and so many different factors will impact this, but this is just an example of how can we put these together. Well, let's see if we can get some balance with kind of all three, and color, because of course color is going to represent a lot of those wonderful vitamins and minerals and the carotenoids and just so many great compounds within our fruits and vegetables. And there was just a comment about the slides being available afterwards. And yes, I believe they will be. I'm happy to send them to Kevin, and then perhaps Kevin could send them out if that's possible. So yeah, we can send those out afterwards. So just we were talking about energy and really how those needs can depend on a lot of factors. So, genetics and age and sex and body size, there's just so many factors here, height and weight and amount of lean muscle. All of these are going to impact our energy requirements. And of course, if somebody's quite sedentary, they'll need less than a moderately active person or somebody who's really active. And athletes who are training multiple times a day their energy needs can get really, really high. Same with children who are just always running around and active and just might have really high energy needs. So this next slide is not to be overwhelmed by, but I just wanted to demonstrate that. And this was based off of just a study that broke it down in kind of grams per kilogram and then looked at the intensity of exercises. But the only thing this is to represent is that it can just really be quite a high requirement need to support some of that high energy. And again, this is probably for on the older end of sort of teenagers. This wasn't by no means a study with young kids. But yeah, sometimes those carbohydrate needs are just really high to support really intense training. Okay, so tips for fueling. And this is where I'll touch a little bit about the vegetables. So the first sort of tip for helping fuel with kids, and again, completely appreciating that we're on the run and it's busy, but when possible, providing that supportive eating environment. We're sitting down together, eating together, and kind of mindfully, and trusting your child to be able to tell, when they're full or when they're hungry. If they do need a little bit more, sometimes if they're going through growth spurts, that hunger can just really increase. And then also supporting a child and sort of paying attention to some of those hunger cues. How do they feel after the meals, and even, kind of after breakfast at school, how are they feeling? Are there any crashes during the day? Maybe there's then tweaks that can be made to make it a little more balanced to sustain that energy. Are they kind of always tired or sore and not recovering? So those are some cues to just help kind of be like, okay, maybe we need to add, a little bit more balance in our plates, or a little more portions, and just looking at some of those things. And then is there consistency with the meals and snacks throughout the day? This will again really help with just regulating kind of blood sugars and energy levels if there's some consistent meals and snacks. Oh, another person just joined. And then that refueling, which we'll get into a little more detail, but just sort of touching on the vegetables. So in a lot of the research with helping support kids and choosing different variety of foods, does suggest that continual offering of those items, kind of without the pressure though, but offering it multiple times. So kind of, I think it was seen about 10 to 12, just because there's so many taste changes going on, and it can just take time to become comfortable with some different vegetables and different textures. So even playing around with the different textures of the vegetables, whether they're cooked a little bit different or raw, things like that can help. And then again, kind of going back to that supportive eating environment where there's kind of that plate of the balanced different items on the plate, and it's very supportive. And if it doesn't work that night, then just sort of accepting and trying again. And also again, appreciating that we only want the best for our kids, and so that's why it can be stressful when they're not sort of eating the vegetables, but continually trying different ones and trying repeatedly, and maybe they'll come back around on some of them, and trying different ways of sort of incorporating them in. So if we continue to put it all together, I will just emphasize that, yes, I broke it down to those macronutrients, but food really is so much more than that. When we're getting those whole foods and, lots of fruits and vegetables, the richness in vitamins and minerals, it really, there is a big difference in sort of the composition there. And micronutrients are so important for optimizing energy production and that tissue repair, especially bone development as they're kids and they're growing. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about some specific micronutrients that might be really important to sort of just to pay attention to and make sure there's enough in the diet. So I just wanted to put in a few quick tips on some of those macronutrients, just based on kind of the research to support lots of activity and for sports. So with protein, for example, research encourages just having it sort of consistent throughout the day. That helps support that recovery, rather than sort of overloading at one meal. So having a bunch of meals without protein and then just all having at one, it would sort of be better to just spread it out in sort of smaller, consistent amounts. And again, protein can be, it's in so many things. It's not something that in North America we're typically deficient in, because it's in more than just animal products and meat and chicken and eggs. And it's also, Greek yogurt, and we've got it in the hemp seeds and nuts and peanut butter and milk and just a lot of food sources. But having a little bit spread out the day has shown to be quite beneficial. And then, of course, consuming it around that the training when there is sort of a bit more activity, or training or a sport practice, having some of that protein around. And we'll get into a little bit more about how to target that nutrition around some of those practices and those games. Okay, some tips with that. So these actually try and avoid them right around those strenuous or kind of vigorous activity, just because beforehand they can sometimes cause a bit of GI upset, stomach upset, simply because they take a while to be digested and broken down and absorbed in our body. And then also because of that, we just avoid them right afterwards because we're trying to get all the benefits from the carbohydrates and protein afterwards when we're fueling. And because fats slow down the absorption of everything, they'll slow that down of the carbs and protein. So we just suggest, avoiding it kind of right around those intense practices. And of course, there'll be, trace amounts in there, but it's more staying away from something that's a really heavy, high fat meal, like, I don't know, like a cheeseburger or a pizza or something like that. That's quite high, just saving it for a little bit further away from those activities. And then just when able, seeking out those kind of healthier fats like the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, which are found in almonds and avocados, walnuts, flax seeds, fish, are just really wonderful sources. And there'll be a little bit of, saturated fats will come up in some meat sources. And that's where kind of having that lean chicken is a way of kind of reducing some of those saturated fats. And typically trans fats aren't a huge issue in BC now because BC does restrict the production of them, but they can still be found in sort of some things. I've seen them in some like baked or frozen type meals and snacks. So just sort of being aware of those two and trying to encourage the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated when able. Okay. So now we'll get into a little bit of that nutrient timing. I know there's a few questions about this. So thinking about, if there's a soccer practice or a soccer game, what can we kind of encourage our child to eat before and after? So, 3 to 4 hours before, that could be a pretty, it could almost be sort of a balanced meal. It's got some carbohydrates, some protein, small amount of fat and fiber. And of course, always fluids are really important. And then as we move closer, and again, I've broken it down here 1 to 2 hours and 30 to 60 minutes, but the 30 to 60 minutes, that may not be necessary. That's sort of if they're about to undergo really intense training and need a top up of carbohydrates to support that. But typically if there's a balanced meal and then maybe an hour before a little bit of carbohydrates, can be really supportive again for topping up that glycogen. And it could be with a little bit of protein, but this is 1 to 2 hours is when you start to sort of target down the really high fiber foods and the fat foods. And instead just get some easy carbs to break down. So that could be things like a banana, or some yogurt as some carbs and protein. And of course, continuing with the fluids. Okay, I'm just going to check in on some of the questions here. Picky eater with dairy, seafood, and nut allergy. Okay, and food before early mornings. Okay, great. So I'll definitely, I'll touch on the picky eater again a little bit more in a bit. And yeah, ideas for food before early mornings. So, and again, this sort of depends on how early, and also just depends on everyone's a little bit different in the mornings with what they can tolerate. And so this sometimes might take some playing around, but typically things that are really sort of lighter on the stomach that aren't, which might be kind of those fasting acting carbs, which would be things like banana, so some fruit, like some berries, and then having that with, a little bit of protein, like some yogurt or some milk, and then maybe a little bit of cereal, or kind of erring on the side of easier carbs for digestion, and then a little bit of fruit. But that's, yeah, it's certainly something that can be played around with to see what the kid can tolerate. So sometimes a lot of fat early on before early practices can be challenging. There's a question about, yeah, if they don't like to eat right away. You know what, if they don't like to eat it right away, then trusting them to kind of recognize that, and then maybe just having something in case all of a sudden they're like, oh, now I am sort of a bit hungry. But everyone is going to be a little bit different with that and what they can tolerate. So I think the best option is, yeah, if they're also having the child sort of pay attention to, if I'm thinking if it's a game or a practice, pay attention to how their performance is. So if they're finding, I don't want to have anything before, but I'm really crashing in that in my practice or in my training session, then maybe it could be beneficial to even just have, half a banana, starting with something that's pretty light. It's a little bit of carbohydrates to just help support some energy and some of that glycogen that's been depleted overnight. So you might need a little bit of energy to support that. But yeah, it can be tricky if their stomach just doesn't sort of feel up to something. But that's where, yeah, I would encourage some playing around, and just sort of, that could be even, recording that afterwards. Okay, how did I feel in this training session when I had a banana and a quarter cup of yogurt before? So something pretty small, but was a little bit of protein, easy carbohydrates, low in fiber. And then how was my energy compared to if I didn't have anything? Yeah, it's a great question. And then for optimizing recovery, so it is still really encouraged to try and refuel within that 30 minutes. Does help with recovery. And this is again with that carbohydrates and protein. So the carbohydrates are kind of helping replenish the glycogen, and then that protein is just really helping with that repair. Another person just entered them in. Yeah, so seeing if you can, so again, this could be something that's, again, yogurt and fruit. It could be, depending on what they can eat after, whether some sort of chia seed pudding type example. I've got a few in the on the go snacks that we'll talk about that are some great, just like easy protein and carb snack ideas that can help, just have something that's quick, that's afterwards. It's going to help with recovery. It's going to support that training the next day, and can just be sort of easy for them to grab and have on hand. And then, of course, hydrating, always so important. Hydrating with fluids to replenish lost fluids and electrolytes. And I see, yeah, a great question came in about sports drinks, like Gatorade or Powerade. And again, this is going to depend on a lot of factors. Age of the child, how intense is that training, how much are they sweating, what the temperature. So I think in some instances, taking something like a sports drink and maybe adding some water to it and diluting it a bit can be helpful. If it's it's intense training and they're sweating, and if they're sweating a lot, then they're losing those electrolytes and they're losing a lot of fluid. And then, yeah, it can be helpful for kind of replenishing those. Typically a full big Powerade or Gatorade is quite large. So without knowing sort of the age and the sport, likely wouldn't need quite that much. And of course, there's quite a lot of sugar in them. So diluting it with some water and then sort of having half of that can at least replenish some of those electrolytes. Certainly can make even homemade sort of recovery drinks. Yeah, I should have posted link to a recipe for some, but certainly you can Google a few of those sort of homemade electrolyte drinks that have just a little bit of salt and maybe some lemon and a little bit of fruit or something, just to help replenish. But also if they're, having that carbohydrate and protein, and there's some fruits and different variety in that afterwards for refueling, that'll help replenish those as well. So yeah, so let me know if that doesn't answer the question, because it was kind of, it depends is a bit of my answer. I think they can be, sports drinks could be supportive if, again, if there's a lot of sort of fluid and sweat loss and kind of a long duration or very intense sport, but suggesting maybe diluting it a little bit and only having sort of half the amount. And then, of course, but still having lots of water as well. Yeah, so just sort of generally, yeah, within the 30 minutes post session, having some of the carbohydrates and protein and fluids, and then within 2, 3, 4 hours afterwards, seeing if you can get in that balanced meal where again you've got the carbs, fat, and protein, and some really great vegetables in there. Good question about protein powder. So yeah, so I mean, I'll be honest, this is just my personal bias. Trying to go from food first with protein sources. And then, of course, I'm understanding of just that sometimes it's just so darn easy to throw in a scoop of protein powder and some fruit, and it's tasty. So I think I would just suggest just paying attention to kind of the ingredients and protein powders. Some are third party tested. So they have the NSF, and they'll say that they're tested, and that just makes sure that there's not a lot of it's actually what's in it is what they're saying, so that the ingredients are accurate. And those ones are also approved for athletes. So for example, the UBC athletes had to make sure that there was a certification that it was third party tested for their protein powders, just to make sure that it fell within what they were allowed to have for supplements. And obviously at different levels of sport, that's not as important, but I think just looking at kind of the ingredients, and certainly, there are some that have quite a ton of ingredients. And I think if it's just sort of a very basic, clean one, and it's found as a way to help support their protein intake, or finding for convenience factors, then it could yeah, it could support that. And then, of course, if able, looking at some of those other food sources, like Greek yogurt comes to mind, and then they're also getting calcium and some other sort of vitamins and minerals with it in that, as well as a good protein source. But yeah, good questions. Please do keep them coming. So this is just an example of trying to put that together with those balanced meals, with the carbs and the protein around those practices and training. And of course, this is just, I mean, I made this up. So depends on the age of the child and the schedule, and understanding that a lot are going to have earlier bedtimes than what's listed here. But just an example, breakfast, if they're getting ready for a gym workout, that may be, yeah, just a little bit of some balance there, some carbs and some protein. And then afterwards, having that carb and protein, and maybe some of that carbs is from fruit to just help fuel afterwards. And then later that balanced meal. And then maybe there's that soccer practice. Again, you could top up before the soccer practice with maybe a banana or a little bit of fruit, just some quick, easy carbohydrates to have before. And then a snack afterwards. So again, that kind of post soccer practice, so 30 minutes window, having some of that carb and protein, and then just that balanced dinner later. So that's just an example of kind of trying to put it together. But again, everyone's schedules are going to be quite different. Okay. So here are some of the additional considerations for the micronutrients that I mentioned earlier that I did just want to touch on. So calcium, vitamin D, and iron, I think are really important for paying attention to. Calcium and vitamin D, particularly because it's just such a critical time period for bone development. And this really sets you up for later in life if there is that adequate calcium and vitamin D. So the calcium recommendation for 4 to 8-year-olds is 1,000 milligrams per day, and for 9 to 18 is 1,300 milligrams per day. Lots of great sources. So yes, with all those milk commercials, I feel like I've always been trained to think of milk and calcium, but there's so many other wonderful sources. Spinach and broccoli, those leafy greens, actually have a lot of calcium in them. Almonds, there's lots of fortified grain products and plant-based beverages, tofu. So there's a lot. Calcium is actually found in quite a few things. And if you have a pretty balanced diet, probably meeting those needs. And then vitamin D. So the recommendation is 600 international units for 4 to 18-year-olds. And this can be tricky. So some food sources are limited, but eggs, some fish, and there's some fortified beverages. So milk will have vitamin D. It is fortified with vitamin D. There's lots of plant-based milk alternatives that also are fortified with vitamin D. And then of course the sun is one of our main sources. So this is why it's challenging, especially these days as we spend more time inside and it's not a lot of sunshine and northern latitudes. So um, yeah, this can just be something that sometimes it's helpful to have vitamin D levels checked and seeing if like a supplement is needed for vitamin D. But certainly if they're outside playing lots of sports, that can be great for getting a little bit of sunshine. And like I said, eggs and some fish and some fortified products do have vitamin D in them. And then iron, I just wanted to touch on. So particularly if somebody is a vegetarian, and increased needs for females as well. So boys and girls 9 to 13, roughly 8 to milligrams per day. Adolescents, it increases to 11 milligrams for males and 15 milligrams for females. So certainly female needs for iron are higher. So again, wonderful sources, eggs and leafy greens, lots of fortified whole grains, lean meats, and having iron with a little bit of vitamin C will really help with that absorption. So whether the iron's from an animal source or a plant source, still having it with vitamin C is really helpful. So adding some bell peppers or some orange slices certainly increases that ability for the body to absorb that iron. Okay, so let's going to move into some of the meal preparation tips for how to navigate those busy schedules. So the first and foremost is the planning piece. And sure, as parents know planning all too well with everything that needs to be planned with appointments and everything, but also just thinking about, okay, what days could maybe be put aside to prep a few meals ahead of time? What days do we need to have those quick, ready to go meals in the morning? And then if possible, involving the kids and seeing what do they think might be really good on cross country race day or soccer practice day, or what might they want, just getting a little bit of input so they can sort of start to learn about that balancing of their nutrition as well. And so just involving them where possible. And I'm just going to circle back to one of the questions, right? Picky eater with dairy, seafood, and nut allergy. Right. Okay. I want to make sure I do address that at one point. Okay. And then, so a second meal preparation tip is having some of those veggies cut up ahead of time. It's so much easier to just grab these when they have already sort of been sliced and they're easy to grab in the fridge. And there's some, tasty dip available, like some hummus, which is again a great sort of protein carb combo with the chickpeas. And actually storing them in glass containers with a little bit of water will help preserve them a little bit longer once they're sort of all cut up there. So that's just sort of a tip number 2, if they're able to have some of those on hand ready to go in the fridge. Meal preparation tip number 3, my personal favorite, prepping smoothie bags. So portioning out ahead of time, just some, could be different flavors of fruits and vegetables to go in a smoothie. And I say vegetables because it's a great way to sneak some in. So having some spinach in there blends in really nice. Actually frozen zucchini, I know that sounds shocking, but it's you don't notice the taste when it's blended at all because it's very bland and then blends in really nice. And so does cauliflower. It blends really nice in smoothies. And it's a great way to add in a few extra vegetables. And this is also a great way thinking of things like beans. And I know we don't usually think of beans in smoothies, but sniffles are cold in here. And but thinking of adding white beans blends in really well with smoothies. And it's a great way of getting a little bit of a plant-based protein in there and some fiber as well. So it's something that probably we don't usually think of, but helps with really makes a great consistency. So having those smoothie bags in the freezer and then thinking, okay, all that needs to be added is maybe some liquid, whether that's some milk or that plant-based alternative beverage, maybe just a little bit of Greek yogurt. And then it's just ready to go, easy to throw in the blender, and could have some fun with your kid around what flavors. Do we want blueberry one day, strawberry banana, or maybe banana peanut butter, and can kind of make it a fun thing there. And I do actually have a handout afterwards that Kevin will send out, and it's just a little smoothie handout about different ideas of kind of how to mix and match things, and can really create some really like neat flavors and a great way to incorporate some different foods. Okay, tip number 4. So creating homemade nut butters with like a lot of added benefits. And I find it amusing because the stores now, there are a few brands you can buy and they're so expensive. But this is a great way of really getting a lot more out of like a peanut butter or an almond butter. So if you get one of those big jars of peanut butter, I know Costco's got that 2-pack for like $8. Or a big jar of almond butter or something. And actually for the nut allergy, there's lots of great nut alternative butters with sesame seeds, sunflower seeds. So even taking one of those and taking out half of what's in it, putting into another jar, and then mixing in with half various seeds. So throwing in some sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, or chia seeds, hemp seeds, and you've now got something that's protein packed. There's going to be some great fiber in there, and it's really easy to be mixed in with different things. So it could be, spread on some crackers or some whole grain toast. Could throw it in one of those smoothies, into some oatmeal, or mix it in with some yogurt. It's just a neat thing to have on hand, and really kind of boost the nutritional value of it. And it also is far cheaper than buying some of those. Yeah, now I see these nut butters in the store, and I was like, you can make some really good ones at home. Okay, and then tip number 5 is to and a message. Keeping it. There's just a quick question about blending the seeds. You don't need to. So things like pumpkin seeds and the chia seeds, sesame seeds, I just stir them right in. I don't blend them. If your child has maybe like any aversions to certain textures, then maybe you could blend them. But otherwise, I just stir them right in. So meal preparation tip 5 is just still keeping it simple. Nutrition can often get overcomplicated, but just kind of thinking that simple plate method. Okay, how can I get some fruits and vegetables on here, some good quality whole grain, and that palm sort of serving of protein. And just sort of simplifying it there, and working from that, and then just thinking about things. Okay, what meals could be doubled, or what could I cook in a batch and use as leftovers for the next day? Batch cooking sort of pans of roasted vegetables, and then those roasted vegetables can be mixed in with great lunches with some quinoa or some pasta or different things like that. It can be mixed in nice and easily. Or with some rice. If you have like a slow cooker or crock pot or any of those things, could do some of the slow cooker oatmeal, or even just stovetop. You certainly could do it on there too, but a great way to just batch cook some breakfasts with the oatmeal and some cinnamon and apple or different flavors. So just kind of, tying it in with that meal preparation and thinking, okay, what could I prepare so that we have a few options for the week, so that we're not sort of scrambling in the mornings. And then also a lot of these can be great post sort of workout snacks, or post games and practices to have quite easily after that. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on seasonal eating, but even I found it challenging to work on this. But there are, as we move into spring and we move into our wonderful where there's lots more variety for fruits and vegetables. So it is really great when we can find things that are in season, and then of course it's seasonal to us, so local here. And again, I find it varies for cost. Sometimes it is more affordable, and then sometimes it actually seems like it isn't. But typically, if something's really in season, it should be at a more affordable price. And then the taste is usually better, and they're usually picked to closer ripeness, so a greater nutritional content. But in winter time, when it's challenging, thinking of those sort of warm foods and those root vegetables and lots of sort of roasting of vegetables and spices, Some of the fall winter vegetables are things like kale, Brussels sprouts, and those sweet potatoes and different squashes, some mushrooms and onions and garlics, and different examples there. But sometimes there are winter farmers markets that actually go right through, and then you can actually see, what's in season. Because again, I think it's easy to lose sight of this because we can go to the grocery store and see all foods available. But certainly at the farmers markets, you can see, yeah, lots of these kales and those kind of green leafy vegetables. And then just a note, and I'll touch on this in my next slide too, when we talk about some tips for trying to save money while maintaining nutrition. But do not be afraid of, canned and frozen foods. So canned beans and lentils are fantastic food source. Frozen berries and frozen vegetables, they still have fantastic nutritional content. A lot of time those frozen vegetables and berries are picked at peak ripeness and then frozen instantaneously, so they really do maintain a lot of their nutrition. So really great options. And also in the summertime, when we have maybe an abundance of things, I think of sort of blackberries, that's a good time to freeze some of those so that we have in the fall and winter. Okay, so some of the money saving tips while still eating healthy. So like I mentioned, the canned and frozen vegetables, they really are a great option. If you are going canned, could just maybe some do have sort of a lot of salt, or some might have some preservatives, so just checking the ingredients, but there's lots of really great, it's still great options, and usually canned items are quite affordable. And the canned beans and lentils. So talking about, this might be my number one sort of cost saving tip, but you can get a can of beans or lentils for like $1.50 in the store, and it's a great way to add healthy fiber, wonderful vegetarian source of protein. You can also buy lentils even cheaper in bulk. It just takes a little more prep because you'd have to soak and cook them. But that is certainly an option. And it's just a great way to sort of make dinners go a bit further. So if you have, a chicken dish of some sort, adding in some lentils to it can sort of bulk it up a little bit more and really boost the fiber content of that meal, while it's still a really great sort of cost saving approach. And then the meal planning. So when we, check in and kind of take that inventory of what's in the fridge and what needs to be used up, then less things can go to waste, because we're sort of paying attention. Okay, so if we're meal planning and I've noticed I've got, some kale in there and it's been in there for maybe a week and I need to use it fairly soon. Okay, what could we make tomorrow night to use that up? So just taking a little bit of that time to plan out with those things that you have available. And I didn't write this in, but I will mention it. Sometimes when you just have certain ingredients, and I think it was COVID that brought this to light for us. But things that we typically would have gone to the store to just quickly buy, realizing that you really can make a lot of those things with just ingredients that are in the cupboard. So even Googling, okay, salad dressing with, I don't know, just an example might be, I had random like pomegranate seeds once and some apples and some olive oil, and just threw in the ingredients to see, okay, are there any? And then all of a sudden there's so many great options, including the ingredients that you have available. So, don't be afraid to branch out to see what you might have in the cupboards that can quickly put together. Like a barbecue sauce is another great example, that quite easy to make from scratch, and then some salad dressings and things like that. Okay, so here are the grab and go snack ideas. And these are also really great protein carb options for around those practices or those games or the training or the activity. So for example, some Greek yogurt and a little bit of fruit. Again, we talked about homemade smoothies. Some hummus and whole wheat pita, could add in some vegetables there too, if that was something that would work. So hard-boiled egg and a pear. So again, balancing protein with some carbohydrates from the fruit. A chia seed pudding. So chia seeds really make, they kind of thicken up and can make a really nice textured pudding. So mixing that with some milk or a plant-based alternative beverage. You can add different things like blend in with some banana or some strawberry for some flavor, or could do sort of banana peanut butter, and then letting the chia seeds sit in the whatever the liquid is, for kind of an hour to 2 hours. And then you've got sort of a great chia seed pudding. And this can be an easy thing to prep the night before and then have it on hand for the next day. Also just it makes a wonderful chocolate pudding if you do it with cocoa powder, so my personal favorite, but lots of options with that. And again, chia seeds are a great way to get in some protein there. And then something like a protein pancake. These can be, can just go in a little Ziploc bag or Tupperware. Actually, I've heard that a lot of garbages are removed from school, so throwing it in a Tupperware. But this could be something as simple as some eggs, banana, cinnamon, almond milk, and oats blended together. It could top with a little bit of peanut butter if they wanted a bit more of a balanced snack, or if it's just left as is, it's fairly good carb and protein snack example. So all of these can be sort of either prepped and easy to grab and go on hand. Yeah. Oh, ricotta cheese pancakes. Yeah. So yeah, fantastic one. Incorporating something like a ricotta cheese to get some of that protein. Yeah, I have heard those are delicious, but I haven't made those myself. And then, okay, yeah, and this is just the smoothie resource. So this will get sent out to you, but just wanted to highlight it. Just, you can kind of play around and mix and match, and can, pick some different flavors with your child about what they might want to try. Like they maybe want to do the cocoa powder peanut butter banana, or maybe going for sort of a fruity option. And then it talks about just how we can incorporate those chickpeas or beans into smoothies, and they blend in really, really nice. And then same with some of those vegetables we wouldn't normally think of, like some frozen cauliflower, or some frozen kale. They all blend in quite nicely. So that's a resource that you'll be getting sent afterwards. And yeah, so just to sort of summarize, and then maybe we can go through some questions that I might have missed. So just some key takeaways, allowing kids to become in tune with those hunger signals. So noticing if they're full, or if they do need a little bit more to support their nutrition on that particular day. Just sort of helping them really just be in touch with that, and choosing that balanced, colorful food and meal choices when possible. Just balancing those meals and having lots of color. And then the regular consistent eating times. So having the appropriate fueling before training and competitions, and then as well as that sort of recovery nutrition within that 30 minute to 60-minute window. And just the emphasis of sort of the carbs and proteins around those, whether it's swim practice or soccer practice or whatever it might be, having some of the carbs and protein around that to support both their activity, and then to support that repair and recovery afterwards. And then just always hydrating with quality fluid sources, so water when able, and then obviously the smoothies and the electrolyte beverages diluted with some water can also help support that. So that brings us to the end. So I'd love to go through any questions that I maybe didn't get to, or yes, feel free to put more questions in the chat box, or if you have any that you'd love to unmute yourself and us, please feel free.
Alison, while we're just waiting for that, can I borrow you to pick two numbers between 3 and 16 for our prize draw?
Oh, yes, you bet. Let's go 4 and 12.
4 and 12. Okay, so that is Aaliyah. I hope I've said that right. Aaliyah and Sheila. Aaliyah and Sheila, you have won $50 gift cards for our partners, POM, Natural Food Markets.
Oh, great.
Congratulations. I'll send that on to you guys. And POM is a sponsorship of this series. And you'll be able to spend that $50. And also everybody gets a $5 voucher as well. So everyone's a winner.
Wonderful.
Sorry, did you answer the early morning practice meal one, Alison?
I think we did. Happy to touch on it again. Yeah, that was sort of so for early morning practices, it does depend a little bit on what child can sort of tolerate it and how they're feeling before and how much earlier before they are getting up. But I was also suggesting to just notice how their energy is during the early morning practice or game or whatever it might be. And maybe they don't feel like eating before, but then they're really noticing that their energy is crashing or it just can't be sustained for the whole practice. And that's where I might want to look at, having some light carbohydrates and protein like the yogurt and banana, something that can be light on the stomach, but playing around with some of those different options to see how they are tolerated is often a really good bet. But something like a little bit of fruit and a little bit of protein for early mornings can often be helpful. And again, just the importance of sort of having a little bit of carbs, at least a little bit, so that it can help replenish some of that glycogen that's lost overnight. Yeah. So if that's sort of what we touched on, but happy to go into it further. And then just looking back at some of the picky eating questions, especially when there's sort of multiple allergies as well. Yeah. So, and that's, looking at kind of what are some other options for, looks like dairy and seafood aren't possible. So some of those dairy alternatives can be good for protein sources, but it's sort of some trial and error with different foods, and then also looking at different ways to make those textures work differently, because sometimes that can be where a little bit of aversion comes. But I don't know if beans and lentils in like mashed into like a chickpea salad could be an option. Because you're mentioning, that sort of only eats chicken, so looking for more alternative options. And then with the nut allergy, some of those alternative non-nut butters are really great. And then adding some of those seeds, like I mentioned, can be a helpful option for sort of combating the nut allergy. And I know that's a challenging in schools these days. A lot of kids can't even bring anything with nut products in, but like a tahini butter or the pumpkin seed or sesame seed, there are some great alternatives there. And then I think just finding a way to maybe add in some of those other like hemp seeds or chia seeds to get a little bit of a protein boost in there could be helpful. And then adding that into some oatmeal or like a non-dairy yogurt or something like that. But certainly playing around with variety is going to be key. Yeah. Oh, we're okay. That's what are your thoughts on chocolate milk at recovery post training? Yes. This has been, a classic one for recovery post training. And honestly, it's because it's got some great protein, it's got some calcium, some vitamin D. So I personally think it's fine. Like, yes, there is sugar in it. And I think, maybe having that with some banana or just something that's like a whole food with it. But that's why it's been around for a while as a post-training beverage, is because it does have a lot of those key components for supporting that post-training recovery. And then of course there's lots of other options too, or could even actually play around with making your own kind of homemade chocolate milk with like some of the really wonderful like unsweetened chocolate almond beverages, or with some cocoa powder and some banana and some ice, and blending that kind of into like a little shake or options too. But otherwise, I think it can certainly support recovery post training. But of course, like within reason, I wouldn't suggest like a 2 liter, but having some of that with some, the protein and carbs in it can be really supportive. Is recovery protein carbs important if they're going to bed in an hour or so after training? Yeah, so this is a great question. And I would say if there is more training again the next day, it can be important. If if you're just finishing a late night soccer practice and your bedtime soon, I'd still encourage having a little bit of protein and carbs right after that. So maybe if they have something, they could just sort of have on the way home or within that window, it could be supportive for helping with their recovery. And if it's within that 30 minutes, then they're probably already, if they've been running around, a little wound up from that. So it shouldn't sort of interfere then with going to bed. And it could be just something really small, again, like half a banana, a little bit of yogurt, or a little bit of like milk and cereals. It could be certainly something that's just very small. It doesn't need to be a big full meal, but it can help support that recovery. And again, especially if there's training the next day. Yes, sons are 14 and 16 and growing so much. Yeah, the needs just really go up, during those periods of growth, and finding ways to support that. And that's where adding some of the beans and lentils and things into a meal that might have some meat can help it sort of beef it up and make it a little more filling, because it's going to have lots of great fiber in there. And so that can help kind of fill them up a little. And then things like oatmeal are going to be great options too, because again, just having something that's got some fiber and actually will be filling up. But it's finding ways to kind of make those meals be as nutritionally dense as possible to help support that growing. And it can be challenging, and it might mean that they're eating pretty frequently throughout the day. Suggesting plain yogurts. Yeah, that's a great clarification. I was thinking plain yogurts in my head, so I should have clarified that. When I say yogurt, I'm sort of thinking Greek yogurt's often great, like a plain Greek yogurt. And I think if somebody, if you're finding they don't like the flavor of it, getting a plain one and mixing in some blueberries, especially if you take something like frozen blueberries and then you defrost them and then they're a little bit more moisture, and you mix that in with the yogurt, it can help with the flavor. Or adding just a little bit of vanilla yourself into it, and that way you can really control the sugar. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I was thinking of plain ones. Is balls with oats, peanut butter, chocolate chip, and honey? No, yeah, I think it's great. And and again, it could be something that is sort of played around with. I think, especially for a post snack, it's going to be great. It's it's got the carbohydrates in there. It's got some protein in there from the peanut butter and oats. In terms of the concerns around fat, I think it would only be if they're finding that it just sits too heavy or anything like that. So just paying attention a little bit to sort of how, so I'm thinking if they're having like an energy ball, maybe before a soccer practice, then maybe trying to have it at least an hour before for something like that. But I think it can be, a great way to sort of boost energy. And then if there's, it's not a ton of fat probably in those. So again, it would just be sort of seeing how they tolerate it. And if they're finding, okay, this does actually feel like my stomach's a little upset or it feels a little heavy, then maybe either pulling it back a little further before that training, or then finding something that just doesn't have, as much fat in it. But otherwise, I think it's still a great option. So many fantastic questions. Oh, thank you. Does anyone have any others?
Yeah, so maybe we'll look to wrap it up there, guys.
There's the question.
Yeah, fantastic presentation, Alison. Really good, really informative, really practical. What we can use to prep, and just them real golden nuggets that we can take forward in our daily planning. Great questions, everyone. Love the engagement. Well, and I will send through some vouchers for POM, the slide presentation, and also the recording. But again, thank you so much, Alison. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm scrolling up to my email here. But yeah, happy to answer any follow-up questions that if I didn't answer thoroughly enough, I'd be more than happy to address. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, and all the best.
Yep, and next week, Alison is up again, and the week after. So please tune into that. Next week is targeted to more that high-level performance athlete. And the week after that is the coach. So I'm sure lots of takeaways from everybody. We're always open to feedback too. You can get my details off the website, pacificsportvi.com. And if there's other topics that you're interested in terms of holistic sport education, please let us know. Our mandate is to provide education for the sporting community. So we'd love to hear from you. Good night, everybody. I am hungry, so I'm going to go and get some dinner, and hopefully it's going to be a healthy one. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Bye, everyone.